Hello guys, how's it going? It's been a while since I've made any content, so I thought I'd just kind of make basically a raw video of some of the things I've been thinking about lately, and you guys can decide whether whether those ideas are of any value or not. But I thought I'd just kind of try to briefly cover a few topics that, like I say, I've kind of been mulling over. The first topic that I want to mention is something that was kind of inspired by Vincent MGTOW, which haven't heard any updates on him for a couple weeks, I think, so I hope he's doing well. Last I heard, he was getting ready to sort of rejoin a permaculture project thing, but really didn't see anything after that. But hope he's doing well. But one of the things that he's mentioned recently, and I think he's completely right on this, I really don't think I could put it better in better words, is that this is not our society anymore, right? The society we live in is so toxic and counter to the interests, really, of good people, I would argue, but especially of good men, and especially of good men, I would argue that, and these are my words, right? I'm kind of building off of what Vincent said, but I'm kind of adding my thoughts to it. Really, people that are not minorities, we'll just say that, who are conservative, or, like I say, basically just being a white male is a big part of the thing, where you're public enemy number one in society. Doesn't matter how good of a person you are, doesn't matter whether you've been poor your whole life or whether you've been better off, in terms of your circumstances or whatever. You're considered to be a bad person. And really, even for men of other races and whatnot, I can't imagine it's a whole lot better. If you're someone that values, small government, liberty, individual benefit from your actions, but also responsibility for your actions, basic kind of core Western values, that's gone now. You're a dinosaur. You're considered to be that way in our society today. And really, society exists for the benefit of anyone that can paint themselves as a victim anymore, to a large extent. And a lot of this, I think, can be looked at politically, like with this last election, where, whether you think that the election was rigged on election day or not, my bigger focus is all the mail-in ballots that came in. You don't know who cast those ballots. You just assume that they voted for Biden, and that's enough to get Trump out of office. And now, we have basically a leftist Marxist regime, in my opinion, that has pretty close to full control over our society. Not quite there yet, but it's the only politically correct narrative now, is that you're good if you fit into one category, and you're bad if you're male, if you're white, if you're conservative, if you're a Christian, if you have any of those traditional values that you want to uphold, like what I've mentioned with small government, but also, just things like valuing yourself and the fruits of your labor and all that. You're bad if you do that if you're a guy, right? Basically, if you're a guy, and especially if you fit into some of those other categories that are considered part of the oppressors as well. I mean, that's just where things stand now. And, it kind of relates to, in my view, it relates to the idea of just taking your ball and going home when other people want to control the game. They want to take your ball and then they want to play their game, and you say, no, I don't really want to do that. Well, that's too bad. You're going to play our game anyway. That's pretty much the way that it is in our society, right? Our society relies on decent men to form the backbone of everything that it does, pretty much. And there are exceptions to that, right? You can talk about having kids and all that, and you need women to do that, but to a large extent, for the most part, society's most vital resource, and at least in terms of capital, is its men, right? Literal manpower. And it just doesn't care, right? It's just you as a man are supposed to just fall in line and do whatever you're told pretty much, and not get really anything positive in return, but you're still expected to continue to do things for women. You're still expected to care about, your community and all this stuff. And, I've been thinking about especially the sort of long-term effects of this, or not just the long-term effects, but even just the immediate changes in your perspective, and over the long run as well in your perspective, once you realize that society is no longer yours, right? Or you don't belong to it. Like it's so toxic toward good people, especially good men, that there's really no reason to participate in the victim Olympics. There's no reason to take elections seriously anymore. Some people may disagree with that and think Trump's coming back in 2024 and all that, which begs the question of what makes you think they won't do the same stuff again or make it even worse, to be, pretty much a corrupt election. They got away with it this time. Why would you have hope for the next election, right? That's my take on that. I don't want to be completely pessimistic about it, but what has changed for the better? And I have been thinking about that whole concept of, is this our society? Do we have a place in this society? Do we have a reason to care about the overall welfare of our communities and whatnot? And I think the answer to that is no. It's time to withdraw from a system and a society that hates us and just wants to exploit good people, especially good men. I focus on men's issues on my channel, but if you aren't respected, but you're still expected to perform for society, there's something wrong with that picture. When it's that toxic, it's time to take your ball and go home, in my opinion. And if men would do this in mass, society would immediately feel it, right? It would have a hard time continuing in anything that resembles its current form. But a lot of men still get trapped in the whole idea of making a woman happy through marriage and having kids that really aren't your kids because they belong to her and she can usually take them away whenever she sees fit. It's really just, it's a game changer, right? And I want to make this clear. I don't mean this in the sense of being violent and doing illegal stuff because you're not part of society anymore. That's pretty unwise because that'll just end up with you in prison. So that's not what I'm suggesting at all for anybody that wants to take it that way. But at the same time, who cares, right? And Vincent mentioned this as well, if I remember correctly, that it's now basically a calculation of risk to ourselves, right? If there's a certain law about something, but that law doesn't exist for our benefit or our protection because, again, society doesn't care about us anymore, and probably to a large extent hasn't for some time, but now it's just so blatant that it's impossible to not act on that or to not make a decision based on that for yourself. It's to a point where it's like, well, it's really a matter of, okay, can I get away with doing this or not? Because this is clearly to my benefit, and what society wants for me is not healthy for me. It's not our society, like I said. So it's more about your own personal calculation of risk, what your own personal moral code and values are, and it doesn't have anything to do with society's code anymore. And in that, I've come to think about this more, and that really strips away so much. Like it changes so many different issues that it's considerable, right? It's something that the more that you put this into practice and say, well, wait a second, I don't really care what happens to the community. I don't really care what happens to the society. The only thing I care about are the people and the things that deserve to matter. But the whole idea of this greater whole, at least in terms of the people around you, aside from the ones that you actually have relationships and associations with, you may respect their human rights. Like I say, you may have your own, and you should have your own value system and moral code, but there's no reason to care about the overall well-being of society anymore. It's not our society. It's intent on destroying itself, because as Marxism becomes the prevalent ideology, and people can disagree with me on that conclusion if they want, but as this whole victim mentality becomes dominant, it's gonna unravel anyway, right? It's not sustainable, and it's gonna lead to most of our rights being taken away anyhow, right? And again, do we want that? Do we want to be a part of that sort of system? No. So, I've thought about how many things that changes, and it's really amazing. Like, almost all the thought process that you can have about community organization and just how you relate to others, who cares, right? Most people honestly are hostile against you if you're a decent man today. If you're trying to do the right thing and mind your own business and, try to advance your interests in a way that doesn't hurt others, people disrespect that now, right? It's all about, are you part of the victim class? What is your race? What is your gender? What is your religious perspective? What is your ideology? Ideology in general is bad, by the way. What are your political views? Maybe is a better way of putting that. It's all about what group you fit into, not about whether you're a good person or not. And that kind of society doesn't deserve our support, especially when, as men, and if you're a white man, or you fit into any of the other categories besides just the gender category, besides being a guy, you're evil according to society, according to those that have political and cultural and legal power in our society, right? According to everything that you see with the narrative in our political system today, you're bad. And it really doesn't make much of a difference how much you try to do for other people. As soon as a woman or as soon as somebody that doesn't like you makes a claim against you, if they have that sort of victim ideology on their side, they're going to get a lot of people that side with them, right? We see the contrast mostly with men and women there, right? Where women have that power over men, and whichever element of that you want to focus on, that's shitty, right? It's just, why support a society actively in that way when you can just not care about that, aside from doing your own risk assessment, right? Aside from being smart about the decisions that you make and not really caring about what society thinks or even how it affects society. As long as you're, basically respecting your own moral code with how to treat people, if society doesn't have your back and you don't have any sort of voice in that society anymore, and you're pretty much bad because of your gender and the other elements along with that, the other attributes along with that, then who cares? And that's, like I say, I've only kind of begun to think about how many things that changes. It changes a lot about your perspective when you don't have that society that you fit into anymore. Society is basically your foe. Society hates you to a large extent. And you can be nice to people and you can sort of not put it out there that you don't care anymore, but there's really no reason to support that society, right? Beyond just taking care of yourself and following what you know to be right, your own sort of moral and value system. It really changes everything once you drop that whole idea of, well, how does this affect the greater whole? Aside from the people and the things that deserve to matter in your life, who cares? And that understanding, that sort of conclusion changes a lot of how you go about your strategy for everyday life, in my opinion. Again, I'm not saying people should go out and do a bunch of illegal stuff, or hurt other people for no reason, nothing like that, but it changes everything in terms of where you put your energy and what you prioritize, because everything else that doesn't have a positive role to play in your life, and all these appeals toward, oh, what about the women, or what about society? Don't you care about this group of people? Or no. Society doesn't care about us, so why should we waste our time on that stuff? It really changes everything when you reach that conclusion that society doesn't have your back anymore. Second thing I wanted to talk about, and this is something that's been on my mind kind of from time to time for quite a while, is this whole kind of idea of chameleons, right? Women being chameleons and coming into the men's community and acting as if they want to talk about men's issues and they want to have discussions with men and they want to bring men back to the table, so to speak, and all that kind of thing. And the sort of conversations that you have, especially within big towel circles, about whether these women are all chameleons or some of them are chameleons or whatever the case may be, right? It seems to me like we overanalyze that a lot. And I overanalyze everything. So I'm being kind of out of character by saying this probably. I feel like I overanalyze everything at times, but it really doesn't matter whether a particular woman is a chameleon or not. And let me get into why that is. To me, the thing that really defines a woman that's not just trying to get attention from men and not just trying to, parrot what she's hearing from men about feminism and say, oh, feminism's bad, look at my cleavage. Feminism's bad. Look at my outfit. Don't I look sexy? Those kinds of women, it's obvious that they're being chameleons and that they're just trying to get attention. But for the ones that really are seriously wanting to help men and inform men on where things really stand and kind of, the pitfalls of relationships with women and that kind of stuff, the thing that really determines whether they're chameleons or not is time, right? If a woman sticks with that for years and she deals with all the trolls and she deals with men telling her whatever, you're going to get that eventually, no matter who you are, if you make content on social media, in particular on YouTube. And you're going to get that especially from feminist women and the system that wants to sort of mute any sort of anti-feminist, anti-gynocentric fact-finding, really. Any sort of voice that's given to that. These women that stick with this for a period of years and they're actually coming up with ideas, they're actually trying to inform men, they're not using it just to make money for themselves, those are the women that aren't chameleons, right? And there's only maybe 3 or 4 that come to my mind because honestly, I don't watch all the content creators, of course. I don't sit around and look for women to pop up, in other words. But that's just it. Those women that just pop up and they only have a channel for a few months and then they get some negative feedback, negative attention, and then they, stop making content. Those were the chameleons, right? The chameleons prove themselves either way without really doing the analysis. It's just, has this woman been making content about men's issues and actually trying to help men? Or did she reveal herself to be a chameleon and just delete her channel? Or at the same time, the other part of that is some women like the negative attention. And what they'll do is they'll attack men. Well, when that happens, it's it's obvious that they weren't really trying to help men to begin with, right? You'll see that a lot too. So the chameleons pretty much work themselves out of it, right? Most of these women that come out here and they make content about men's issues or against feminism and whatnot, they're going to disappear when things get hard. They're going to disappear when they're not getting the attention that they want from men, from the men's community, right? And the ones that just, they don't say anything with substance and they show their tits in front of the cameras on a regular basis, or they wear a bunch of makeup or they wear revealing outfits, which is pretty much the same thing as what I just said. They're the chameleons. They make that pretty obvious. But even the women that it's just like, they make some decent content and you don't really know, but then they disappear, they're the chameleons as well, right? The reason why I'm mentioning this issue is I think, and I may get some flack for this, and that's fine. It is what it is. But I think when it comes to these types of issues of trying to analyze female behavior, I think there's too much attention given to that within the men's community. And like I say, probably more with MGTOW than any other part of the men's community, because you'll hear this with the whole unicorn and the Walt thing too. It's like, is this woman a unicorn? Is she in the Walt? Well, I don't know. Is she capable of filing for divorce? Yeah. Okay, she's not a unicorn or a Walt, right? The whole character evaluation part of it is given too much attention and time, because it doesn't change the fact that marriage is still a bad deal for men, because anybody's capable of doing bad things, right? Like I say, I don't like to use the whole sin language too much on my channel and make it sound like I'm getting, into the Bible thumping part of this, but everyone's capable of sin. Even people that aren't religious or don't believe in God, or people that do believe in God. I think pretty much anybody who's sane realizes that everyone's capable of doing bad things. Well, if that's the case, it doesn't matter how good or bad of a person she is, right? You don't get married, you don't have kids. It's not going to change your view just because you meet a woman that's nice to you, or may actually be a decent person. And, you see guys from time to time who get too far into the whole women are all evil stuff. And what happens a lot of the time is they meet a woman that's actually nice to them and actually wants to treat them well, at least to start off with, right? They may or may not have ulterior motives, but that's not the point. They meet a woman that doesn't seem to be that way, and all of a sudden now she's in the wall. She's the unicorn. She's different than all the other women. And what happens is eventually that relationship ends, and it most relationships don't end well in general, but especially, if she makes an accusation against him, or she tries to take part of his stuff, right? Or if they end up having kids and there ends up being custody disputes or something, now all women are evil again, right? Like the guy goes through the whole process and it's just like, oh, she just tricked me, right? I thought she was in the Walt, but she wasn't. And then so many months or years later, that same type of guy will find another woman that doesn't seem to be like that. To me, that's unhealthy, right? And like I say, I might get some flack for pointing this out, and it is what it is, but I think it makes a lot more sense to not really worry about that, right? What matters is the laws. What matters is the overall culture. What matters is the fact that everyone's capable of doing bad stuff, and women have way too much power to do those kinds of things to men. That's what matters. Doesn't matter whether she's a good woman. I mean, it does in the sense that if you still are willing to have a short-term relationship or be friends or whatever, of course her character matters then. But in terms of, like I say, the chameleon stuff, who cares? You don't know exactly what her motivations may be until time points that out. Either her channel will still exist in a year or it won't, right? Either she'll be consistent or she'll just say the same stuff, but it has no substance, which I guess, I guess that's a form of consistency. But, either her channel and her content will be worthwhile rather than her just showing off her ass all the time, or she'll just show off her goods, right? I mean, it'll be apparent after a period of time. It's not really necessary, in my view, to do this analysis of her character. It's like, whatever it is, you'll find out eventually if you're going to waste your time watching the content, right? I mean, that's up to you if you think a particular person's content's valuable, whether it's a man or a woman. But, ultimately, time is the decisive factor, right? Someone like Karen Strawn is not a chameleon, in my opinion, because, yeah, she's made some money off YouTube, but she is one of the people that helped me wake up to a lot of the stuff that's really going on today between men and women. That in itself is not sufficient evidence to say she's not a chameleon, but all the other men that she's done that for, I think, is. Yeah, there are other people, other women that probably are not chameleons, but they've stayed with it. They haven't just decided, oh, it's easier for me to just retreat from this because, yeah, I kind of wanted to talk about this, but now I'm not getting positive attention, I'm getting negative attention, so I'm going to quit making content now. Those are the chameleons, right? Unfortunately. Even if they had good intentions to start off with, they're still pretty much chameleons if they really cared more about a positive feedback from men or a positive experience from men than they did about actually reaching men, right? It becomes apparent. So I think sometimes there is way too much of a debate within the manosphere about whether all women are chameleons or not. Probably not. The vast majority of them are, in my opinion, because they're not really trying to help men, and it becomes apparent that they'll either attack men, or their content will have no substance, or the channel will become all about them, right? And their sexuality, basically. Then she's a chameleon and she's just doing it for male attention. There are some women that I think that have shown that that's not the case with them, but why sit here and analyze it? Right? Again, the main thing is, what are the laws? What are the culture? What is the overall situation between men and women? Does a woman being a good person versus a bad person really change the overall dynamic? No, not really. As long as the laws are the way they are and the culture is the way that it is, doesn't really matter. So, I don't have a problem, don't get me wrong, with women making content that allows men to take the so-called red pill, to wake up to the disadvantages that men face in general in our society, and, especially in relation to women. But you're not going to know what their motivations are all the time. You have to take what they say with the grain of salt, right? It's like, okay, this is true, this is valid, but I don't know why it is that you're presenting this, except time will probably show whether she's a chameleon or not, right? Whether you pay attention to it or not, either her channel is going to disappear, or she's going to get mad at men, or she's going and make basically content that says MGTOW are bad or MRAs are bad or whatever, because she gets mad at men giving her negative attention, or she'll continue to stick with it and she'll have her own ideas and she'll actually give some sort of some significant amount of energy and time toward helping men be aware of this stuff, right? And if that's the case, then she's not a chameleon. So to me, it proves itself either way over time. And trying to analyze individual women's characters it's really not necessary. It kind of misses the point, in my opinion. But, I've been thinking of that for some time. Like I say, I just think there's too much attention given to that part of it, rather than just saying, well, yeah, she's a chameleon because she just threw men under the bus, or, I look at her videos and, 75% or 90% of them have her tits hanging out, or of that nature. She's a chameleon. She's doing it for attention. If that's the case, why would she present herself that way otherwise, right? But again, the whole debate, or the discussion over which women are chameleons and are they all chameleons, it shows itself in the end. You just have to be patient with it and really not put too much time and energy on trying to analyze their individual character, because that's gonna show itself one way or the other anyway, in my opinion. So the last topic I wanted to discuss, and this is a little bit more random than the other topics, I think, but this is just a general thing that I've built on over the years, is the many reasons why I don't like people. And so, as I've gotten older, I never really liked to socialize very much, to be honest. I've talked about how I've never really fit in to any particular group of people, right? Any particular clique or whatever you want to call them. I've always sort of felt like I never completely had the same ideas or views as, what you're supposed to have to be in one particular group. I've talked about that kind of stuff in the past. And like I say, as I've gotten older, I've realized more and more the sort of flaws in human nature and how damning those flaws can be in particular situations or particular contexts. And so now I'm just going to basically bitch about some of these things that really make it to where, for the people that think this way, which seems to be the vast majority of people overall, it really makes me not want to be around people. Especially in terms of what I'm going to talk about here with like different problems in people's basic thinking. I want to say, to start off with, I'm not trying to make it out like I think I'm smarter than other people. In a general sense, I'm dumb when it comes to many different things. So I'm not trying to say that I know more than everybody else. I'm not trying to say that, I'm better than other people. I know I could give that impression sometimes if I don't actually say that, but these kinds of things should not be as problematic as they are. But people, we have these flaws in the way that our brains work, right? We have these flaws within our species, basically. And, it really becomes an issue when you look at some of these particular problems, these particular flaws. One of them that I want to discuss is the concepts that people can agree on, the things that people can understand, but then as soon as these ideas are applied to something in practice, they just get abandoned. Now, what the hell do I mean by that? Because it sounds like a convoluted bunch of nonsense. What I mean by that is something like this, for example. Do you agree that most people should do things, or people in general should do things based on self-interest? Right? Do you agree that people should do things based on, all right, I'm only going to have healthy associations with people. If I don't receive something positive out of being a friend with someone or, treating someone like family, if they're not going to do the same type of thing for me, that's unhealthy and I'm not going to be part of that. Most people, I think, would agree with that and say, yeah, if someone doesn't treat you like family, then why should you treat them like family? Most people would say, yeah, that's fair enough, right? If someone's not really your friend and they don't have your back, you're not going to be friends with them, right? Most people conceptually would agree with that, I think, and say, maybe other than the parent-child relationship thing, which is, a little bit more, not unconditional, but in that direction, because it's a special type of bond if your parent or child is not an asshole, right? If there's something reasonably healthy there, and we're talking about adult children and their parents primarily, I guess. But aside from that, putting that to the side, yeah, I think most people would say, indeed, you should have only healthy associations with people. You need to get something in return for the efforts that you make with people in your life. If you're not getting something positive in return, it doesn't really make sense to be associated with those people. I think if you can make that case, and most people would agree with you in theory, and then you look at how people view relationships between men and women. You look at how people expect things from others in return for nothing, right? And if you point this out and say, and again, the male-female dynamic is the sort of most extreme example of this, that, well, men don't get anything in relationships anymore. Women don't do any of the traditional stuff they used to do. They are a huge liability and risk in terms of divorcing you and taking half your stuff, right? There's really no reason to have children, because look at who gets child custody. Look at the men that can't even see their own kids, but still have to pay child support for those kids. Women don't do any of the stuff they used to do, right? Like, even expecting sex from a woman, oh, you're seeing women only as sex objects. You're objectifying them. This is the way things are now, right? And I don't want to sound like I don't want to overstate my case, but what do women do for men in relationships that makes that a positive association for men overall, in most cases, right? I'm not saying there are zero women that have anything to offer at all, but most women just expect that they should get whatever they want from men and not give anything in return. So why should men seriously consider, in most cases, long-term relationships with women? And you're just going to get attacked And people are just going to talk about how important marriage is if you're talking to the traditional conservatives. And people are just going to say, well, no, it's not that way, Dan. Relationships are 50-50. Oh, okay. So why don't women date broke men? Why don't women date men that don't have anything to offer if indeed it's not really about what you have to offer? It's clearly like anything else. If you're going to say, well, you need to have positive results from whatever you invest in life and only have healthy connections with people, and then you look at the overall situation between men and women today, most men should not even date. Most men have no real reason to consider this type of stuff, like, to consider a long-term relationship when there are no benefits, right? If you ask a woman to make you a sandwich, that's considered sexist, but expecting a man to pay for kids that he doesn't even see, their welfare, that's what a real man does. That's how one-sided overall general relationships between men and women are. But yet, society and women, and even I would say the majority of men, will say, oh no, Dan, you can't say that, or, that's wrong because it's about love. But yet people will conceptually agree to the idea, I think in most cases they would, right? I could be wrong about this, that you should only have connections with people when it's positive for you. But then as soon as men and women are involved, all that gets forgotten and common sense goes out the window, and a basic ability to apply the things that make sense to everyday life just goes away. And why do I not like people as a result of that? Because it's annoying, right? You see people like this with their politics and everything else to a large extent. I've just used the male-female dynamic as an example here because it's so extreme and so stark. But why is it that all of a sudden the concepts that and can generally agree with, when you have an example where that should clearly apply, like it's not even debatable that you look at the situation between men and women, relationships are supposed to be beneficial for both people, yet men don't really benefit, right? Especially when you take into account that men can get sex outside of relationships, right? You don't have to be in a relationship to get that either, really. And a woman inside a relationship won't necessarily want to sleep with you. So what is it that women offer to somehow make it to where that deal is a good investment for a man, especially in a long-term or committed relationship? There's nothing there, but yet most people can't see this basic thing. And this is, like I say, guys, this is one of these things that it annoys me. Like, it makes me not want to be around people because you can't get them to apply this kind of basic stuff to everyday situations because it goes against the narrative that we've been indoctrinated with, and people can't step outside of that. Another example of things that make me not really want to deal with people in a lot of cases is ideology, right? People use ideology as basically an excuse to be mentally lazy and not think, right? It's not, okay, here's the problem. What makes sense to resolve that problem? Well, we can have a debate about it, and we could talk about, okay, what could the results of this be, and what examples do we have from the past that worked or didn't work for this type of problem? Oh no, it's just either whatever the leftist media says or it's whatever Trump says. That's just what most people in the United States at least seem to default back to. Again, I side more with the conservative, or not conservative, but right-wing sort of, mindset, right? I think that the left has completely gone off the deep end and the right hasn't as much, but nonetheless, it's just people can't really say, oh, well, this is what I think and why. What they'll do is they'll just make personal attacks against you or try to shame you if you say, well, that's not really going to work in this situation, or we've done this before, and it's just, the facts don't matter, right? This annoys me about people because the facts just don't matter to most people. All that matters is ideology. All that matters is the ideas that they're being sold because they're not thinking for themselves. And people not thinking for themselves again, it makes me want to avoid a lot of people. I'm not saying I always think for myself the way that I should. Not saying I know all these things that other people don't, right? I'm not trying to say I'm smarter than everybody, again. But most people just willfully do not want to think for themselves. It's just whatever message somebody else has put in their mouth, right? And again, it makes me just not want to have a lot of these kinds of discussions with people, because they're, as soon as you say something they don't like or they don't agree with, that doesn't, I should say this, it doesn't agree with what they've been taught to think, they're just going to attack you because they don't think for themselves, and they're not going to have that conversation with you in any sort of reasonable way. Again, that's sort of a thought process or a flaw in human thinking that really makes me not even want to be around people, at least in terms of talking about meaningful issues like this, right? It's just, again, it's not that I think I'm better than everybody else, but this is just a pattern that I see that is frustrating to deal with people. The last example I want to give of this, of really sort of the lack of ability to deal with things by having your own thought process, is groupthink, which is similar to ideology that I just mentioned. But, you know, when your so-called scientific community is a good example of this. When they say something like, you know, global warming and climate change is the worst thing ever, and we need the government to make sure that people don't have all these carbon emissions, you know, ignore China over there, or ignore statistical analysis from an unbiased perspective. We're just all going to say that if you don't agree with climate change, you're stupid, as you know, the issue that is defining our times. But then at the same time, the same scientific community will at least partially endorse things like transgenderism, right? It's like, well, no, that goes against basic biology, because the vast majority of people either have a Y chromosome or they don't. Now the so-called scientific community doesn't want to basically make a statement that, no, we understand biology and that doesn't make sense, it's not really valid, right? That doesn't mean that I think, of course, that, well, maybe I shouldn't say of course, but that doesn't mean that I don't think that people should be allowed to do what they want. And, you know, if you want to change your parts or whatever, I'm not going to stop you or want to stop you, but that's not normal, and it never will be. You know, it's just, but yet you can't make that kind of statement as the so-called scientific community, even though that's hard biology, right? It's just, it's clear for anybody that's thinking about it that, no, the scientific community should say that that doesn't really make sense. But yet, if you want to sort of have this conjecture of, well, the Earth has been warming up these last several years, supposedly, so now climate change is something that we have to worry about, and it's the most important issue of our times, it's like, where is the scientific method? You know, it's not based on actual science. It's just based on groupthink. And a lot of people just go along with this, right? No matter what your views of climate change and transgenderism or any other issue about, you know, about which the scientific community as a whole makes a statement, it's like, how often do you actually see people say or hear people say, well, we did this experiment and we looked at this data and this indicated that, but, you know, you can draw your own conclusions because, you know, even though I think as a scientist you can draw conclusions and make statements about what you believe, it's like most of the time the evidence is not completely indicative of just one potential interpretation, right? But you don't hardly ever see this, because it's all about the narrative. It's all about, well, we all think this because we're smarter than you, right? You see this with a variety of different people who claim to be experts, or they claim to know more than everybody else, and then they can't really defend, or they're unwilling to defend their own points of view in a way that's consistent with what they're supposed to know how to do, like with the scientific method. it's just sad to me that people will just go along with this. It's the mob mentality, right? It's, if you don't agree with this, you're dumb, because anything that goes against what we're being told is smart somehow can't be valid, right? It's just people let everybody else, groups of so-called experts, ideologies, what they hear in the media, and just basically what they've been indoctrinated to believe through the education system, they let this just absolutely control their thinking. And like I say, I'm not saying I've never been sort of hampered by that. I'm not saying that, it's not a challenge for everyone. It is. So I'm not saying that I'm unaffected by all this, or that, I'm above all this, because I'm sure that I'm not. But just in a general sense, people don't think for themselves. People can't use common sense. They can't take the things that they know and apply them to things in practice, right? In the sense of, well, if you realize that relationships need to be beneficial for both parties, and what do women do for men in relationships? So why does it make sense for them to even be in relationships with women over the long run, when that's just a trap for them? That's just a liability. You can't say these things to most people. They'll freak out because it goes against what they've been taught to think. And this kind of stuff, guys, has made me want to distance myself to people. And it relates back to what I said as, the first sort of idea that I put out there about this not being our society, especially as decent men, right? Not that I'm saying that I'm necessarily the epitome of a decent man, right? Again, I'm not trying to say I'm good or I'm smart necessarily, but it's just sad, right? It's just sad that this is not a society where we really have a place anymore. Most people are unwilling to think for themselves. It's painful to be around so-called normies, I guess. I don't know what other term to use there. It's the clown world that we have, maybe that's the other term to use, is so extreme and so it's just getting worse, right? It's just deteriorating over time to the point where I really want to disengage, right? I don't want to be too pessimistic with what I'm saying here, but maybe a lot of you guys feel the same way, and if you have particular things about people that you don't like that makes you not want to be around people a lot of the time, beyond what I've just said here, if you want to leave that as a comment for anybody that listens to that part of the video, I'm interested to know why it is that you don't like people. But it's just one of these things where, again, it's sad that we're at where we're at. And I'm not saying I have the answers or that I don't fall into some of these cognitive biases or cognitive laws or whatever you want to call them, but it's just, I find myself wanting to distance myself more and more from people. And I have my own personal things going on with my health and with things that I need to overcome, and that plays a role in wanting to distance myself from people as well, I won't lie. But it's just, when you see the overall state of things in our society, in our culture, with our politics, with our laws, it's just, you're honestly better, in my view, the way that I'm thinking for myself more and more, right? And some people may agree or disagree with this, is I'm better off just talking to the people that show that they're capable and willing to think for themselves, and everybody else can just pretty much F off, right? I hate to have that attitude in some ways, but it seems like, a lot of people are just beyond being reached. A lot of people are just they're so far gone in terms of letting the media think for them and, just using their ideology and using groupthink, the mob mentality to reach conclusions, and just not being willing to reach beyond that, even those that are capable. They just, it's just a matter of when the lie is convenient. It's just a matter of, whatever is beneficial for, mostly for the elites, mostly for the people that really have wealth and power in our society, but everybody that goes along with it and everybody that feels like they have a stake in the game, even, like I say, in cases where the game is really rigged against them. I don't know, guys. I've been rambling on for a while. I was kind of concerned that if I made this a live stream, that this would go on for too long, too late tonight. I'm making this on Friday night, so like I say, I kind of want to end the video there. But for everybody that's stuck around, I appreciate you guys listening to my ramble. Again, I want to know what you guys think. Do you agree that for decent people, and especially decent men, is this our society anymore? I don't think it is. I think that this is a society for people that are winning the victim Olympics, that, are supporting what the elites want them to support, which is basically different forms of Marxism, different sort of ways of going about the victim ideology. I think it's basically in their hands now. And, you can talk about this election and stuff like that, how it's ridiculous to have all this mail-in voting and think that there's no voting fraud, and to see some examples of, cheating and not doing what you're supposed to do on election day itself. But like I say, my bigger thing is that you can't really think that who these people that voted even were, right? And no one seems to care, right? It just all gets dismissed by the left-leaning media. And like I say, it's just, maybe I'm being a little bit too depressing about this, and maybe it's gotten me down more than what I think what it really should have. But I just feel as if it's kind of time to disengage, right? It's time to stop worrying about a society that no longer has our back, right? It's time to kind of focus on ourselves and our own moral code and our own values, and let the people that want to basically run this society into the ground finish it off, right? It may take decades or centuries for that to happen, right? And that's another debate in itself. But yeah, that's kind of where I've been with this. I just feel like more and more, in terms of dealing with people in everyday life, that I just want to disengage, that a lot of them really kind of aren't reachable. And that's part of the reason why I make content, right? Is so that the people that are reachable can listen to these ideas and agree with me or disagree with me or whatever, but, have something to say in response. But most people just don't seem to be willing to do this. And like I say, as time has gone on with recent events, but also just, over a period of several years, I've gotten to where I don't really even want to deal with most people anymore. And like I say, is there a reason to, if this society really isn't our society anyway? So let me know what you guys think, and what comments you have on the different parts of this video. And like I say, maybe I don't know whether this is doing better than doing a live stream or not, whether I rambled more in this case or less than I would have on a live stream. But let me know what you guys think, and for those that watched the video and liked it, I appreciate your viewership and your support.